Hello, I'm Martha Glennie, jewelry professor at George Brown College in Toronto. My videos look at different jewelry forms, items. I'm offering tips, tools, and suggestions that work for me. So we finally made it to the polishing lathe after all that sanding, but here we are. And I want to just talk a little bit about the polishing lathe in general before we take on any specifics, okay? And polishing in general. So this is a typical polishing lathe, what you see here. It has two spindles, which takes it up a little grade, but is really convenient because, say, I can have my wheel buff on this threaded tapered spindle and I can have my ring stick on the other. And that makes it very convenient to switch back and forth, or I can have a wheel buff here and a lap here. It's great. You can also hear the vacuum, an essential part, and another essential part is our safety. Before we start to polish, we need, yes, we have a vacuum, but you know, folks, let's take real care. Some of our polishing compounds have silica in them, and silica inhaled over time can lead to various serious lung disease. So let's wear our N95 respirator mask. And of course, we want to protect our eyes. So we're going to wear our safety glasses as well. So having gotten that out of the way, let's look at what we're actually going to be using. So the most used tool at the polishing lathe is a wheel buff. And you see two different types here. This is a treated cotton wheel buff, treated so that it's stiffer, it's harder, and therefore it does a little more cutting. This is a muslin wheel buff, typical for rouge. It's softer, it's for the buffing portion of our polishing activities. It's simply, you look for the larger hole, okay? And this simply goes on. It's threaded on, it threads away from you, like that. The polishing wheel is going to move to you, so it won't come undone. Now the tool alone, the polishing wheel buff, doesn't do anything, right? It's the combination of the wheel and the compound that does it. This has abrasive in it. It's just finer abrasive than what we used in our sanding processes, because that's what polishing is, right? We take finer and finer and finer abrasives until we have that beautiful mirror finish. So this is Tripoli. You could also use white diamond. You could also use gray star. Any of those are open and are polishing compounds. So when we're polishing, let's talk a little bit of theory here. When we're polishing, it's the combination of having enough compound on the wheel and having enough pressure with our object against the wheel that's doing the action. So you have to play with those, and each piece is going to be different. But you've got that variable, okay? So you've got variable number one is the wheel you're using. Variable number two is the compound you're using. Variable number three is how hard you're doing it. Variable number four is the orientation of the piece to the wheel buff. Here, 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 here. And then I'd say another variable is how we take the piece to the buff and away from the buff. So what I just did is what you want to do. You take it to the buff and away. There's a tendency that we want to lead into the piece and lead out of the piece. I call it flipping. So you're flipping the piece on and you're flipping the piece off. And after you do that repeatedly, what do you think happens to that edge? Right, it disappears. And you can even change the form if you do it enough. So take it to the wheel buff and take it away. Now that raises the question of what part of this wheel buff do we want to use? Do we want to use it here? Do we want to use it here? Where do we want to use it? Well, you want to use it in this, if I can make a pie shape with my fingers, that's the area that you want to use it, right there. This section right here, okay? If you get too high, the piece tends to catch, and if you get too low, the piece tends to catch and fly out of your hands. So it's this area right here. That's the sweet spot. There's one more tip, and that is that we want to start our polishing process by going across our sanding lines. And that's because we don't want polished sanding lines, okay? What we want is to cut through the sanding lines. And we can do that by polishing across the sanding lines. Now, once those sanding lines start to be gone, you're going to want to be moving the piece all the time, changing the orientation all the time. But first up, go across the lines. That wraps up the intro to the polishing lathe, wheels, and compounds.